Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 9 of the JavaScript Jabber podcast. This week we're going to be talking about testing JavaScript with Joe Eames. Joe, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself really fast, and then we'll do the rest of the introductions and start talking?
Sure, thanks, Chuck. My name is Joe Eames, and I've been a web developer for a very long time, and I'm the creator of testdrivenjs.com. It's kind of my own personal quest to bring better unit testing and test-driven development to the JavaScript world. That's pretty much me.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I've actually had lunch with Joe a few times. I organized the lunches for the JavaScript group here. And so I'd organize them up in Murray, and which is a suburb of Salt Lake City. And Joe and I have had one-on-one lunches twice now, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So I might just start scheduling lunch with Joe and then stop scheduling JavaScript lunches up in Salt Lake County. But
they're probably really romantic, though.
Yeah. We should have lit a candle at the last one.
We should have.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, we also have Jameson Dance on the podcast.
Hi, I'm Jameson Dance. I'm a web developer, JavaScript developer in Utah.
All right. I'm Charles Max Wood from teachmetocode.com. I guess we're all from Utah this week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so really interesting for me anyway is that I used to complain a lot that I would write JavaScript and then I couldn't test it because I'm pretty accustomed to testing my Ruby code. And so Joe did a presentation at was it the last meeting that we were at or the meeting before that?
The last one.
It's the last one.
Yeah, about doing TDD with JavaScript. And I'm sitting there going, ooh, this is speaking right to me. And so I'm a little curious, Joe, what your take is as far as how TDD works with JavaScript versus maybe doing TDD with other languages or frameworks.
Well, it's pretty interesting, the difference in opinions and views. It seems like there's a very large amount of people that are realizing, oh, we do need to unit test JavaScript, but very few people are saying we need to test drive our JavaScript the way that many people are saying we need to test drive our middle tier code. So I think the biggest difference by far is in the community. Having done a fair amount of test-driven JavaScript, I would say that there's some differences for sure. Some of the tooling is lacking still, especially from the standpoint of from the perspective of doing test-driven JavaScript. The tooling is lacking. But in the end, there really isn't any difference. In fact, JavaScript has one big, huge benefit when test-driving code that just about no other platform that I'm aware of, no other language or architecture that I'm aware of has, and that is that you can test drive the DOM. And in other languages, you can't test drive the Windows presentation layer that you're writing or the web page in a JSP or in Ruby, you can't. In Rails, you can't test drive that.
Right. I mean, the best you can do from what I can tell is because there are tools that allow you to test and see if certain things are on the DOM, but usually what they're doing is they're parsing it, and then you can search it via XPath or some other selector.
Right.
But that's about it. That's all you get. So and the other thing is it's all static. There's no JavaScript engine behind it. So basically, if you wanted to test drive your particular DOM manipulation, you have no recourse other than using a browser.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, people are testing the browser with tools like Selenium and doing automated testing, but those things aren't actual, unit tests. Mostly they require a lot of visual inspection, manual inspection for them to be effective. And then the Selenium, of course, gives you the ability to at least know if things are working or not, but it's not the same thing as actually test driving it with unit code, with unit tests. And of course, Selenium tests historically have been extremely brittle and very difficult to write, very difficult to maintain. So having a large suite of Selenium tests, of UI level tests, is just not feasible.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to get good coverage of just Selenium tests. We've done some of that at work, and I mean, we use them for some things, but it's a lot easier to test at the code level than at just the user interaction level.
Yeah,
right. Wasn't it also traditionally tied to just one browser, just to the Firefox browser?
Nope, you can run it on IE and Chrome. Selenium WebDriver works with Chrome. If you install, there's like a Chrome WebDriver plugin or something that you install, and then it can run on that.
Well, and I tend to think of those as more full stack or integration tests as opposed to unit tests, because effectively what you have to do is you have to run your app, and then on the other end, something is interacting with Selenium or with the browser that Selenium is driving to make it happen. And so if there's a problem in your stack, you don't necessarily know that the problem is in your JavaScript. And that's the bonus with unit tests, is that you're able to isolate things and figure out where the problem is.
Right. Yeah. People, not everybody out there understands that not all kinds of automated testing are created equal.
Right. So why don't we talk a little bit about the different types of testing really quickly, like unit test, integration test, UI tests, whatever you want to call them. I've also heard of functional tests, which in Rails they call them functional tests, but they're really just unit tests on your controllers. But what are the different types in that you guys have seen, and how do you define them? What are the pluses and minuses of using those?
Well, the two clear definitions are unit tests and UI tests. Everybody knows what a unit test is and what a UI test is. Of course, there should be a little bit of discussion about a good unit test. It doesn't involve more than just a single component in code and doesn't really talk to the outside world, doesn't talk across the network or to the disk or to the database. Those are unit tests, and UI tests are testing the entire application and just automating the UI. It's that middle level of tests, like what you're talking about, Ruby's functional tests, that there's a few names for them. A lot of people call them functional tests. Some people call them integration tests. And those are the ones that test just right below the UI level going down.
Right.
So I thought that Selenium tests would count as integration tests because you're testing the whole stack, right? In order to test if you're not just running the UI on some kind of like dummy layer, then when you're testing stuff with that, you're testing your UI, but you're also testing all the backend stuff behind it. So are those not integration tests?
Well, it really just, again, those definitions are a little less clear across the community. So it does depend on who you're talking to. If you're talking to people that have a really, really, really strict set of definitions, probably they'll say that integration tests don't involve the UI, but there are lots of people who assume that an integration test does mean the UI. It's not.
Right.
It's the side point is it's just not clear. There's a lack of good definition out there.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that comes back to the community problem you said earlier, that JavaScript as a community doesn't have a huge tradition of testing.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit here about like the different levels of testing. Then the UI test, the integration test, and the unit test. Just to kind of outline some of the benefits. I mean, why you would want to do any or all of them. For me, really, unit testing, it's kind of the way of pinpointing where your problems are. Usually, they only test one tier, and you isolate them, like Joe said. With the integration tests or functional tests, those are nice because effectively you can get behavior. You're getting out to the behavior level. But the nice thing with those is that your UI is, in my experience, the part that's most prone to change. And so this is getting everything below there without having the brittle nature of the DOM or whatever as you change what's there. And so this is your APIs that your JavaScript's hitting, things like that, and you can make sure that the behavior, on the back end is what you expect. And then the UI tests kind of give you the full stack so that you can see that the entire app behaves as you would expect under certain circumstances with certain inputs. Did I sum that up more or less accurately? Or
I think so. I think that was a really good definition.
I think that there are different approaches that have like different types of validity to them. Like for instance, like behavior-driven development or testing can help you actually design your program. If you're starting from the point of view of, okay, I want a program that does this, that allows the user to do these things, then I can write my test right now. Okay, the user should be able to do these things, rather than my component can add two numbers together or can take something out of the database in a certain way. So I think the abstraction level that you get from being able to zoom out so far that all the problems look small is pretty valuable when you're starting out on a program.
Yeah, that's very true for sure.
Yep.
When you look at the different kinds of tests and the kinds of value that they bring, and then the drawbacks that they have, it's really funny because what seems like is the most valuable is the tests that test everything, from basically UI level tests. And you'd think, just looking at it from just getting introduced to the subject, that, hey, UI level tests should be the only kinds of tests we need to write because that actually tests that everything is working. But when you realize that they're brittle, they're slow, the UI changes, all those sorts of things, then UI tests are no longer that valuable. Then you look down in the functional integration middle level of tests that test at least from a certain point on down. The value there is, again, very high, but the number of tests that you actually have to write from that
Huge.
level, huge.
Well,
Huge.
that's because you have dozens of code paths that it can take, and
Right.
you have to account
Everyone's-
for each one, and so you effectively do a mathematic permutation on that, and
Got it.
or a combination anyway. And yeah, so I mean, if there are a dozen different code paths that it can take, I mean, you're going to have to write probably at least 60, 70 tests to get each code or each branch. If there are a dozen branches, you're going to write tons and tons of tests to get that covered.
Exactly. And then you look
And the
down
worst
at
thing is,
Go ahead.
yeah, and the worst thing is that then you've written all those tests, and it looks like it should be working, but then something changes in the middle, and then all of a sudden your UI is still broken.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the unit tests and the integration or functional tests come in.
Right. So then if you look down at the unit level tests, those are by far the most feasible ones to write. But it is true that they're only as good as their authoring, and it's a little bit like engineering, right? Mechanical engineering. You can make this mathematical model of whether or not a bridge will hold a certain amount of weight, but until you actually build the bridge and start putting load on it, you really don't know. The math is only a predictor. It's not a realistic knowledge that for sure things will work. And unit tests are the same way. I view them, they're like the mathematical predictor of will it work, but you don't know that you glued the pieces together correctly, because unit tests, they isolate the pieces. So you don't know that the pieces work together correctly until you actually get the application running. So it's an important thing to realize, is that unit tests are not a silver bullet. They don't guarantee that your application is correct.
Yeah, but they're a good way of checking your math.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
now that we're talking about all this work involved, with JS annotations, and also we were talking about Dart the other day, where we're getting into more typed languages, but also you can do that with JS annotations anyway. Is it feasible to have automated test scaffolding generation?
Can you be more specific? Clarify exactly what you're asking.
Well, I mean, can I be like really, really lazy and then just like write an interpreter that kind of looks at my code and says, okay, well, you wanted to put this type of input in here, and you want to get this type of input out, so we're going to, put a lot of data in there that kind of should fit that and should.
So I've seen that in one place, and the people who thought that was a good idea was Microsoft. So does that tell you anything?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, I see two things here. One is basically where, how do I say this? If you're generating your test based on the code, and so basically what you do is you automate it so that it looks at the code and says, this is what it's supposed to do. Now feed values in and get values out. That inherently, it kind of circumvents the whole point of testing, because you should be telling it, this is what I want you to take in, and these are the effects that I want you to have. Be it you give back this result, or you change the state in these areas, or what have you. That's the whole point. So that kind of automated test generation just doesn't really ring right to me. At the same time, I was talking to who was it yesterday on Ruby Rogues? We had Dan Cubb on, and he mentioned mutation testing, where basically it will throw bad values in, or change the logic so that it should take different code paths and behave oddly, and see if it can make it behave that way, or behave in ways that it shouldn't, using a tool called Heckle, which is a Ruby tool, and I don't know if there's an equivalent in JavaScript, but that kind of testing I think really does firm up your code, because in that case it should either exit gracefully if it's not getting what it expects to get, or it should throw errors or exceptions where you would expect them to, or if you pass a valid value, then it should give you a valid result, even if it's not within the range of values you expected. And and so you can define some of that to kind of firm your code up, but it's a pretty involved process from what I understand. So
Sounds like it.
So you guys were talking about like type checking and stuff. There's a program called Typed.js. It was on Hacker News about a month ago, that if you do type annotations on your functions, it'll generate tests on that. So I mean, it has all the drawbacks and upsides of what you talked about already, but you can do it in JavaScript with this program that somebody wrote. I'll link it in the show notes. So it's pretty cool.
yeah. So one framework that I keep hearing about is Mocha. What is Mocha? Because I haven't really had a chance to use it. I've heard of Jasmine and QUnit. Is it kind of the same thing?
Well, so of the popular frameworks, what's really cool about Mocha is it basically seems like they wrote that for Node first, And man, they added a lot of really cool features to Mocha. It does work in the browser, but it works basically natively in Node, where none of the other frameworks do. They all have, you have to put some modules on them, adapters to get them to work in Node, where Mocha works right in Node. Mocha has some other really cool features. In the end, it's really just another test framework. But so if you're gonna unit test your code, then whether you choose Mocha or Jasmine or something else, you can still get the job done. It's all the little extras that make a big difference. So for Mocha, one of the cool things is it'll do either BDD or TDD style of testing, which is very nice. Very flexible depending on what your preference is. It does have a really cool feature where you can have it color code the tests as to whether or not they were fast, kind of medium, or slow, and help you clue in on places where your performance might be lacking. Mm-hmm. And then it also has a lot of really cool output. They call them reporters, so that you can gather the results of the tests and display them in different ways. And some of them are just displays in Bash, but they also have like a JSON output. They have the test anything protocol reporter, and then of course a web browser. But the web browser one is by far the most lacking. So if you're going to do browser testing, Mocha, if it's going to be your first choice, you might want to play around with the output yourself and add in your own CSS or something.
Mocha does have the landing strip test reporter, which is my favorite. It's got the little Unicode plane, flies down the landing strip that your tests from. And the other thing is,
that's cool.
Mocha, I've used Jasmine and I've used Mocha, and for async stuff, I much prefer Mocha because I really had a hard time getting Jasmine to test my async code. Maybe that's just because I'm dumb. But Mocha makes it really easy to let the test know when the async stuff has finished, and it should actually start validating responses. And that was kind of a pain to work with in Jasmine.
I've never used Mocha, but it does really seem like they looked at the existing frameworks that were out there and really are trying to take the next, revision on testing frameworks.
Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, so I'm also curious. I know that Joe, you're pretty partial to QUnit. What is it that you like about QUnit over some of the other testing frameworks?
Well, I wouldn't say that I prefer QUnit over other frameworks, but it did have a lot of value for what the implementation that we were doing. One of them was it's somewhat, for browser testing, it's relatively similar to an XUnit framework, but the only one out there that's really close to a typical XUnit framework is YUI. But YUI has a ton more ceremony in the tests, so that's why I wasn't really keen on using YUI. So QUnit actually just feels a little bit more like the other testing frameworks I'd used on the server side. That's basically the biggest reason why I chose that one over Jasmine. Also, it had, at the time, when I was looking around, it had a little bit easier integration with TeamCity. But Jasmine does integrate with TeamCity as well. It just seemed like QUnit had a few less steps. That was really the big differences for me. So I didn't choose QUnit because it was vastly superior by any means. In fact, it has a lot of things that are lacking. It has its fair share of weaknesses, just like all the other frameworks do.
Right. So is TeamCity, does that include CI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Continuous integration. I should clarify for the non-initiated.
Right. Yeah. For the continuous integration server we were using, which was TeamCity, QUnit seemed to be the easiest one, the one that was most recommended, that slips right into TeamCity very, very simply and very straightforward. Although it looks like JS Test Driver actually is even easier. So I'm intent on switching over and starting to use JS Test Driver on top of QUnit.
What is JS Test Driver?
So JS Test Driver is, like Mocha, it's actually really cool. It is a testing framework just like QUnit, but their goal, or kind of what they admit to, is they haven't really innovated on the test side. What they're integrating on the test, they haven't integrated on the unit testing side. They're innovating on the test running side. So actually getting your tests to run, that's where they've spent the majority of their effort. And so what they have is the ability, they have a couple of things that you can't do pretty much anywhere else. The biggest one is you can run a JS Test Driver server and set up slaves for each of the browsers, and then when you check in or save your tests and tell it to run, JS Test Driver will run your tests in all three browsers.
So
all three being IE, Mozilla, and Chrome?
Right.
Safari?
It's actually Lynx, Opera, and Chrome, yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about a workflow for running your tests in the browser? Because I've done a lot of server-side JavaScript testing, and that's fine. You just run your Mocha or Vowels or whatever command to run all your tests. But yeah, what is a good way to get it to run your tests and report them back automatically? Or do you have to like click on like actually open a browser and go to a web page and then inspect the output?
Yeah, it's the latter. You know, if you're actually in the middle of test driving your code, writing your unit tests, then yeah, you got a browser open and you're just going to go back to the browser and keep refreshing it. But that's not, in the end, it's not too much different from a server-side test framework where once you write the test, you'll either click somewhere in the test and tell it to run or go to your test running page and tell it to rerun the test. So there's that one extra step. It's the same thing with your unit testing frameworks and the browser-based ones.
Okay, I'm a little bit of a command line junkie. So what I'm wondering is there any way to run DOM-based tests on the command line without having a browser open to refresh or whatever?
There is, and it is called Phantom.js. Phantom.js is a headless implementation of WebKit. So it's WebKit, but without like the browser window. So you can like load web pages in it, and then test them and then get output back, but without actually opening up like a browser. It'll just start it in the background and then kill it when it's done, kind of thing.
Right, and that's how most continuous integration solutions for JavaScript work, as well as they use Phantom.js.
So then if it's loading the whole browser engine into, or it's loading it up anyway, whether that be in memory or whatever, is that generally slower than just loading it in a browser or slower than running unit tests where you aren't interacting with the DOM?
Well, since generally you do that on the CI server, I don't know. I've never compared it to locally.
Cool.
I don't know either. It's a good question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one other thing that I wanted to jump in on, and I know we're moving through these topics kind of quickly, but I kind of want to get a solid overview, and then, maybe we can bring Joe back or, somebody who's working on some of these frameworks to kind of give us the rundown on some of the more specific things. What about mocking? I've seen Sign-On, and I think I've seen another library or two, but I don't remember what they are.
So Jasmine has its own mocking, but a lot of people use Sign-On. It seems to be the most popular framework out there. There are several mocking frameworks, dozens really, but Sign-On seems to be the most popular one that most people are using. That doesn't mean it's superior in any way. It just means that that's the one that most people have been using, perhaps by default. And so what's great, of course, about JavaScript compared to a strongly typed compiled language or static language is that it's a lot easier to mock things than it is in other languages. So Sign-On you just feed Sign-On an object, and it goes through and takes every member of that JavaScript object and replaces it with its own function, a new function that it can intercept and watch the call, and then if you ask it to, it'll still delegate the call onto the actual implementation that you wrote of the object. So rather than having to create a new object by hand, you actually can take an existing object and then utilize that and watch it. And it also, of course, with JavaScript, we tend to use a lot of just plain functions all by themselves. So it'll also spy on functions. They're called spies. It's kind of a new thing that the server-side frameworks don't have, because most server-side languages don't allow you to have functions that exist outside of an object.
Right. So can you explain the difference between a mock and a stub?
Yeah. So in the world of, everybody calls all these kinds of things mocks, but I think it was Martin Fowler who took the time to try to come with strict definitions. He indicated that there's this broad category called test doubles, and then beneath that there's all these different things, and the two that most people are used to using with a framework are mocks and stubs, and in reality most people just use mocks and very few people use stubs, which is in my opinion the exact opposite of what it should be. People should start with using stubs and then only use mocks when absolutely necessary. The big difference between a mock and a stub is not a technical difference, even though in most frameworks, especially the server-side ones, they actually have a big implementation difference. The real difference between a mock and a stub is a mock is something that the behavior of the object and the interaction with that object that you're mocking is part of what qualifies to make that test successful or not. Whereas a stub is only used to guide the flow of the test. So think of it in this way. If you're writing a little component, a little object in JavaScript that's going to make an AJAX call, and you want that AJAX call to either be made if you pass in another object and that object is valid, you want to check it for validity first, and then make the AJAX call to say save that object to the server, or not make an AJAX call and return a value indicating that the object wasn't valid. Then you have two code paths, and you'd use a stub to make a specific test take one code path or another. So if you do want the object to be valid, you would use a stub to say, hey, yeah, when you ask this object if it's valid, return true. But you don't care that it asks the object that whether or not it was valid for that point in that test. All you care is that if the object was valid, then do make the AJAX call, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what a stub's for. Whereas a mock would be if you are mocking the AJAX call, which you would want to do in a unit test. You don't want to make AJAX calls because you don't want to be having to run your entire framework in order to run your unit tests. So if you're going to mock the AJAX call, then the test only passes if you actually do tell the AJAX component, hey, yeah, go ahead and call the server and take this object that I'm giving you and save it up. Well, the test is only successful if it's given the right object and it actually makes the call. So that's what a mock is for. Is a mock says, yes, you did make the call, and here's the parameters that were passed, and the parameters that were passed were what you were expecting. That's how you check validity and make sure that test passes. That's the purpose of a mock, where a stub is simply to control flow.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that makes sense. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but I think that clarified some of it up. So one other thing that we seem to be talking about or talking our way around is BDD versus TDD. Does that color your perception of how you write your tests at all?
It really can, but it also depends on as an organization, are you actually doing BDD? Jameson, you sounded like you had said it before that you guys had done some BDD or you preferred BDD. Is that right?
I don't think I said that. I don't know. I think I know AJ says that he thinks the difference between TDD and BDD is you put in the word should.
Well, the sad truth is from the framework, the unit testing level, that's really most of the difference. If you look at the difference between, say, Jasmine and QUnit, other than the fact that Jasmine recommends, they have this format of putting the word should in your test names, they really function the same.
By the way, don't use the word should. It either does or it doesn't, okay?
You should not use the word should.
No, seriously, this is a pet peeve of mine because our spec in Ruby does the same thing. It's, it, and then the next word in the description is always should, and I'm just like, should? No, it does, and if it doesn't, then it fails. Sorry, I got off on a different tangent, but yeah, I generally agree with that premise on unit tests.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree with you. I find the should syntax to be a little off. I kind of prefer naming my tests with a given when then syntax, which actually again does come from BDD.
Yes.
But BDD is much bigger than just the unit testing. It really describes more, in addition to the unit testing, it also describes how you interact with your business analysts and encourages non-programmers to be able to write some of the tests, not the unit level tests, but higher level like integration level tests. And that's where Cucumber comes in.
I was just going to say, I really hate the word business analyst. It sounds so dry and boring. It's just like,
doesn't it?
Non-developer, basically. Like, I don't know if anyone says that they're a business analyst. Maybe I'm offending all the business. Like, there's a convention for business analysts, and they're all going to come to my house and beat me up. But.
So 2 seconds on that, real quick. If you don't have someone from the business side coming and telling you what the business requirements are, you're the business analyst.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, one way or the other, either somebody else is making decisions on the highest level of the application, defining behavior and functionality through the app, or you're doing it. And so, if you don't have a business analyst, you are a business analyst, and you need to be thinking that way. And
so
anyway.
it kind of sounds like for BDD, you're looking at the app as a user would look at it, where with TDD, you're kind of looking at it as you develop it. So you're saying for TDD, I need to make this function that returns these parameters, and you write your test that tests that. And with BDD, you say, like, I need to be able to click and drag stuff around, like as a user, not like what functions or things you're going to call. Is that accurate?
Kind of. So my take on BDD is that the mantra that I keep hearing whenever people talk about BDD and when I do BDD is outside in. And so you start at the outermost layer and you work your way in. And so basically you start at the functionality or feature level. You break that down into behaviors. Those behaviors guide your UI and integration tests. But in order to get your UI and integration tests to pass, in other words, to validate, so you're writing acceptance tests as UI or integration or even unit tests. And anyway, so you work your way down from the outermost level to the innermost level. So you're saying, I have this behavior that I want in the application, so that means that I need this API. So then you write the integration test for that API, and within that integration test, well, you're calling these objects, and these objects need to behave in this way. So then you're writing the unit tests. And so if you're doing strict BDD, where you're using TDD as part of the process, then you're just approaching it from a little bit different angle. Whereas TDD, all that really means is I'm writing the tests sort of as acceptance tests for my code, except that you're writing the test to drive your code.
So it sounds like BDD is a superset of TDD then.
In my mind it is.
TDD to do BDD.
In my mind it is, but some people think of it differently and see them as kind of opposing points of view. I don't see it that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think they're by any means opposing points of view. In the great article that Martin Fowler wrote, Mocks Aren't Stubs, he talks about the different kinds of TDD-ers or TDD-ists, I guess is what he calls them. And
it's pronounced TDDists.
TDDist. There you go. And he talks about the fact that a lot of them approach a program from the outside in, from the UI level down, and that's called the Mockists tend to do that a little bit more often than the classicists. Those are the two divisions. If you get bored, go read that article. It's a fantastic article. So, but you can be a TDDer and doing like what you're saying, Chuck, that with BDD, you start from the outside in and really not be doing BDD because you're just doing TDD from the outside in.
Right. Because
BDD has more. But I agree with you. I think it's a superset of TDD. And I think it'd be hard to do BDD without following the practices of TDD that mostly exist, which are write your test, make it write a failing test, make it pass, refactor, and continue.
Right. And that's where your given when-thens come in, because then you have acceptance tests that your business people, business analysts, whoever, can look at and say, yes, that's what I want.
Right. And the Wikipedia article on BDD is really quite good and talks about these sorts of things. And the reason why the inventor of BDD invented it when he was doing TDD is he just kind of felt like it wasn't enough. And there was that same cycle needed to be happening on bigger levels than just the unit level.
Yep.
So can I ask a question about something to circle back to mocking a little bit? When you say that you want to make an AJAX request, so you'll mock the jQuery AJAX request, that's kind of relying on the idea that you have this global jQuery object that's just manually there, right? And so inside your test, you'll define a $sign object, and then in the $sign, you'll put like $sign.ajax, and that'll be your stub or your mock. Is that what you were talking about earlier?
To be honest, to do it really right, to really do a good purist TDD form of doing that, there's one of the somewhat lesser known rules of TDD is to not mock objects that you don't own and to abstract away any third-party libraries. So that would include jQuery.
So you're saying you would pass in jQuery to this object?
To even a level further,
pass in some kind of object that can make requests.
Exactly. You'd pass in a wrapper around the jQuery AJAX. That's a more pure form of TDD.
Because that just makes that feels like a really weird API to use that function that you're always passing around jQuery. I mean,
well, I wouldn't recommend passing around jQuery for all the things that jQuery does, but for when it comes to talking to the outside world, namely AJAX, then wrapping the AJAX call, because for one thing, jQuery isn't the only show in town when it comes to making AJAX calls, and if at any point you do want to change, then it's nice you've got this wrapper around it.
Well, the other thing is usually you're not just going to be creating it just to have it there for your tests. I mean, what you're probably going to do is you're probably going to create this abstraction, and you're going to make it so that it simplifies all the rest of your code.
Exactly.
And that's kind of one of the bonuses that you get out of a pure TDD approach, if you want to call it that, is that basically, it's not just about writing the tests first. It's about literally driving the design of your code based on what you're testing. And so if you put these levels of abstraction in there, then you wind up with cleaner code.
That's absolutely true. That's a great summary of TDD.
So
the purpose of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're not driving the structure of your code, then you're not doing TDD.
Right. So, Joe, are there any other good resources that people can look up or follow for learning more about testing their JavaScript?
Well, so of course there's my website, testdrivenjs.com. That's getting more and more content all the time. And we also are looking for people that want to contribute to that as well, or repost articles. In addition to that, there are a few other really good resources that are out there. Most of them are relatively specific or general to TDD by itself. When it comes to merging TDD and JavaScript, there's a surprising lack of stuff out there, but you can find articles on test driving your backbone models and your backbone views. You can find articles on test driving different kinds of JavaScript, but they're few and far between. There's no really, really great place. On testdrivenjs.com, we do have a resources page that lists links out to some general TDD stuff, plus the one book out there on test-driven JavaScript development as well. So that's kind of it. It's
What's
a Google
search.
Called? It's called test-driven JavaScript development.
Oh, seems obvious.
All right.
Now that you say it.
Well, cool. Well, I think we're just about out of time, so we'll go ahead and jump in on the picks, unless there's something else that you want to add or that Jameson wants to ask before we go.
Nope, that's just it's like the thing you say before people get married: speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, until next week.
I would like to throw in my one more plug that if you are doing JavaScript and you're not test driving your JavaScript, then you're missing out on better code.
Yep, that's generally true of any code. If you're not test driving it, you're missing out on some just awesome benefits.
Exactly.
We didn't even talk about regressions and stuff. I mean, you can it's so much easier to change stuff if you know that you have the safety net of tests.
Right.
You can just break some random chunk of it.
Yeah, by far the largest article on that test-driven.js site is all about the benefits of TDD, and it kind of enumerates those various different things, refactoring and actually adding maintenance, those sorts of things, and the benefits, and kind of digs into why it's much better to do it with TDD than even just doing after-the-fact unit testing.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, let's go ahead and do the picks. Jameson, what are your picks?
My first pick is having my mic unmuted. I think this is the first week that's happened for the picks for me. My next one is Goodreads. It's a social website for tracking the books that you have read and want to read. I just think it's cool to have them all in one place, because I don't really ever think about all the books that I've read or ones that I want to read. I kind of used my Amazon wish list, but that doesn't really keep track of stuff I've already read. So you can add books that you've read, you can rate them. It has a recommendation engine, like everything these days, it seems like, and it's pretty good. So that's goodreads.com. My next one is an ebook called Bootstrapping Design, and this book is for me. It's for people that aren't really designers, that still want things to look pretty, but don't want to pay hundreds of bucks an hour for a really good designer. So it's really to the developer who knows what good design is when he sees it, but can't really come up with it himself. It's pretty short. I think it's 130 pages. And it's $40 right now. It was just launched a couple days ago. It's a great resource. It's got sections on typography, on color, and it's really actionable. It's not really abstract with design principles, which I don't know. I'm not enough a designer to just read about like spacing and then apply it to a website that I'm working on. So that's been really helpful for me to improve my design skills. And then my last pick is a band called Apparat. They're really chill electronic music. I listen to them while I'm coding.
How do you spell that?
Apparat. It's not really techno. It's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just chill electronic music. Has some vocals sometimes, but it's stuff that I can listen to that's relaxing, that doesn't demand my attention. So it's great for writing code too. Those are my picks.
Awesome.
All right, I'll go ahead and put some picks in here. The first one is I've gotten hooked on a program called Things. I think I picked this on all 3 podcasts this week.
Oh, I love Things. I have that. I use it a lot too. It's great.
But, it's a to-do list, except it actually has all the features I want. I was using Wunderlist before, and the real problem I had with Wunderlist was that there are things that I want to make sure I do every day, and I need them in my checklist so that I can see them and say, you need to read a business book this morning, or whatever. And so, it's just real nice to be able to have that kind of recurring thing. But the other thing is it has projects and areas of responsibility in it. So I can assign things to projects. I can stick things in like, do this with the kids, do this with the wife, whatever for family, take out the trash, this kind of stuff. And it's in there when I need it to be in there. And so it's really nice. It actually will sync over wireless with my iPad. And so that's also nice. Apparently they've been promising cloud sync for a long time and haven't put it in. And so
Bing's Cloud Sync is called put it in your Dropbox.
Yes, that's actually what I did. But if you put it in your Dropbox, then it won't cloud sync with your iPad. Like if I go somewhere else, then I have to have it sync over Dropbox to my laptop and then do the wireless sync.
Oh yeah.
So it's not not seamless.
Real cloud sync, but
yeah. But anyway, so that's one. It was funny because we had like a 20-minute discussion after Ruby Freelancers this morning, and we talked about books for, I swear, like 20-25 minutes before we ended the podcast during picks. And so I was going to pick Goodreads, but I'm sure I can come up with something else here. Have I done the rundown on my podcast setup? I think I have on this show. My other pick really is, I'll pick the iPad. I don't have the new one. I really want the new one. Generous listener. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, I just love it. I usually just use it for media consumption and not even for like books, because I have a Kindle and I think the Kindle is far superior for reading on. But it's really nice for when I just need to watch a show, or if I need to just kick back and play Angry Birds or something. It's got that huge screen on it. It's just really nice. And the other thing is I can actually prop it up next to my computer. And so if I don't want to pull up things on my computer, I can actually just turn it on. And that's usually what I have running underneath. So then I can start checking stuff off. So it's just handy that way. But anyway, so those are my picks. Joe, did we warn you about picks?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So my first pick is a board game called Last Will.
Last Will.
Yeah, it's really fun. The point of the board game is you're a super rich old guy that's getting close to dying and want to spend all your money before you die, so you don't leave it to your kids.
Oh, like my life.
Yeah. And so you're trying to get rid of all your money, and whoever does the best job of getting rid of their money by the end of the game wins the game. And it's just really fun. It's kind of set in sort of a 1920s-ish type setting.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's really fun. So that's my first pick. My second pick is the TV show Psych, which is about a guy who's really, really smart, and he pretends to be a psychic detective. And it's a hilarious show. Tons and tons and tons of 80s references. Uh-huh. So love that show. And then my third pick is a book. It's by Glenn Cook. It's called The Tower of Fear, and it's not one you can find on Kindle. It's an rather old book, but 80s, so super ancient, really. But possibly, in my opinion, the best book, best sci-fi fantasy book ever written.
I love how you talk about the 80s and say ancient. I think one of us was born in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah, Jameson. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The other two of us are old men.
Yep.
So
it's funny because on Ruby Rogues, Chuck, you're like the young man.
I am. When we started, I wasn't the youngest, but Peter bowed out, and yeah, now I am.
Let me throw in one more pick, just really quick. There's the TV show Touch with Kiefer Sutherland. Starts up tonight. I saw the preview for it. It was really cool, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, they had that first. How long was it? Was it just an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked good. I'm really, really picky about my TV, and it wasn't compelling enough for me to give up an hour a week for. So what I'll probably wind up doing is wait until they release it to Netflix or DVD, and then I'll just watch them all.
Well, you definitely need to check out Psych.
I might have to. My sister was watching it the other day, but I didn't get into it anyway. But yeah, it could have just been that one episode was an off episode, because it seems like every show has those. So we'll see. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And it's super awesome to see that testing's kind of getting some attention in the JavaScript world, because I think it's one area that a lot of people make excuses not to use it in, and I think there's some real need for it to, ramp up and people to get serious about it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a real sign of serious development going on in JavaScript, so that's exciting. All right. Yeah. So we are in iTunes. We used to, like I said before, we were in New and Noteworthy. I don't know if that was in the pre-show or not, but we were in New and Noteworthy, so I just want to thank everybody who has been subscribing and leaving reviews and stuff, because we really, really appreciate it. It does help us move up. It'd be kind of fun to see this show overtake Ruby Rogues, but we'll see how that goes. Anyway, so if you go into iTunes, you can leave us a review or just a rating, either way. Tell your friends so they can subscribe. If you are on a device that is not an iTunes device, namely like an Android phone or something, you can go to the website and just use the RSS button or link and subscribe there, and that should actually get you into, then you can get it automatically on your phone or whatever. Other than that, I'm thinking about starting a book club on this show, kind of like what we do on Ruby Rogues. So if you have any book suggestions for books that you want us to cover and talk about, then go ahead and put them into the request a topic on the website. You can either click the feedback tab that's floating around on the page somewhere, or you can click on request a topic and then just type in book club and then the name of the book. And within the next few weeks, we will probably give that a try and just pick one of the books that people are suggesting.